August 17th? What's that?
August 17th, the day of infamy. No, that was Pearl Harbor. I'm sorry, that's a different day of infamy. Real estate is changing forever. I've been doing this for 47 years, and I will say, frankly, that the changes that are coming about August 17th, which happens to be when we're recording this Saturday, are the biggest set of changes I've seen in my career.
What's the changes?
The changes basically are the National Association of Realtors lawsuit was a class action, and it was settled. And as a result of that, all the rules for real estate have changed. So what's changed? Now, in order for me to work with a buyer, we have to do what's called a buyer representation broker compensation form, a BRBC. And I have to complete one of those forms before I show a buyer any property whatsoever. The purpose of that form is to define what the buyer's expectations and requirements are and what the broker will be compensated. So basically with that form, the buyer is officially hiring me. Now, from a buyer's perspective, now it is more critically important than ever that a buyer vet their agent and really find an agent that is experienced and knowledgeable in the negotiation process and also in just how to deal with the new rules.
Got it. So how does it affect the seller?
Well, the seller basically is no longer able to advertise or promise commissions, or technically compensation, but commissions for sure, to the agent. In the good old days, as of right now, what happens if you go to MLS, the MLS basically will say, we'll pay the buyer, let's say 2.5% if they bring us an acceptable offer. That will disappear from the MLS. In many MLSs, it's already disappeared. So with regard to the buyer's broker, the buyer now has to negotiate with their representation, not the seller offering an amount of money for that offer to come in, shall we say.
So you mean sellers is not able to offer any concessions?
Okay, well, you picked the magic word. How did you do that? You must be reading about this.
Yes,
the magic
of course.
The bad words are compensation, which is not quite the worst word. The really bad word is commissions. You're not going to see very many of those references. The new word is concessions. Semantics matter. So concessions, the seller may offer concessions to the buyer. He may offer, okay? He doesn't have to. So the seller says, okay, Mr. Buyer, I will offer you, I may give you some concessions up to 2%, 2.5%, whatever. So what will happen then is there will be a communication where the buyer is screening properties and his agent, the agent that he's hired now with his BRBC, we'll just keep using BRBC, folks. Trust me, it's easier.
Okay, gotcha.
With the BRBC, he may agree to pay 2.5%. So the seller can say, I'm going to give you 0. That means that the buyer would then be responsible for the full 2.5%, and he may then not want to go view that home. So that's a danger for the seller. They need to be cognizant of that. So let's say the seller says, I'm going to give 2%, and the buyer has agreed with the broker to give 2.5%. Well, that means there's a shortage. Now, the buyer and the buyer's agent can negotiate. The buyer's agent may say, well, okay, I can get 2, I'm happy with that. Or he may say, we've agreed to 2.5, so you're going to need to give me the additional 2.5 out of your pocket. So the thing that's important with the new rules is there are risks involved, more so for the buyer than for the seller. Because ultimately the seller makes a decision on what's an acceptable price. And it's unrealistic and unlikely, in my opinion, that the seller is just going to say, oh, no problem, I'm just going to give away money.
Got it. So what it means is, you just mentioned, the seller cannot advertise that they are giving out the concessions, but they are still able to give out the concessions.
Let's put it this way. The seller can say something to the extent of, the seller may consider.
May consider. Gotcha.
Concessions. Okay. And it's not going to be commissions or any other word. The seller can actually pay the buyer's broker if it's negotiated in the contract. That is labeled as compensation. If the way it's going to probably work generally is the buyer is going to contract with their buyer's broker, and they're going to agree to a certain compensation, 2.5, whatever percentage. Okay. The seller may then say, I may offer, and then the buyer will basically, the buyer's agent will check for the buyer and say, are you offering concessions? And the listing broker will say, yes, we are. Now, in that scenario, then, you have a situation where the seller is contracting and paying his agent only. That is essentially the compensation for that listing agent to list the property. As far as when it goes beyond that to the buyer, then it's negotiated. And it's going to be fully negotiated, because that was the purpose of the lawsuit, was to eliminate this dollar amount. And they purportedly felt that that would save the buyer and the seller money. Now, I will be honest with you, I don't believe that it's going to save the buyers any money, and it's a lot of additional negotiation. And frankly, if the seller is not willing to do any concessions, then the buyer may be responsible for the entire commission. And that means the buyer may elect not to go to that home.
Got it.
Because if you were a buyer, you say, hey, I've got my 20% down, I'm ready to go, call Lee for a loan. You do that, and she says, well, that's great, but what about this, the commission? Well, you may be responsible for that commission, and let's get real. If it's 2.5% and it happens to be $1 million home, that's $25,000. Well, I think a lot of folks won't. So, first-time buyers that have been saving and squeaking, maybe trying to get up to the 5 or 10% threshold or 11% threshold, depending on which loan program they're going for, may not have the money to do that. And from a seller's perspective, that risk is, if they don't have that money and there's no concession possibility, then they may not go see that home. Now, simplistically stated, more activity, you have more showings, okay? You basically have more offers. More offers means more money to the seller. And that may cut back on the number of showings and therefore the number of offers. So that is a risk to the seller. The biggest takeaways from this, BRBC, you need to have an agent that is knowledgeable, can negotiate well for you, and gets what you're trying to do to help you achieve your real estate goals. The other thing is you have to have a good negotiator to try and get the concessions to equal what the agreement is between the buyer's broker and the buyer as far as compensation. And then from there, it's present the offer and get it accepted, hope for the best.
What are other benefits or effects that would affecting the buyers?
The benefits to the buyers, to be honest, the whole thing was started on the basis that the buyers were overpaying. But the reality is, I personally don't see where the buyer's in a position to have a favorable situation, because it makes the negotiation process, where there wasn't any before, now it's a negotiation process. And before it was, okay, if we have an acceptable offer, then the seller agreed to pay the buyer's agent, and it was all done. Now everything is being negotiated, and supposedly it was going to reduce the amount that the buyer's agents would receive, but we don't know that. There's no history on this. I personally think that quality buyer's agents are going to be charging in the 2.5% range. Who knows? I mean, that's up to the negotiation process, because of course commissions have always been negotiable, and they've never really been fixed in any way, shape, or form. The only way that a company can determine if they want to fix and say the minimum that we will accept is. Mm-hmm. Now, as always, there will be discount folks out there that will say, I'll do it for X dollars, or I'll do it for this. And they may or may not be good negotiators. I mean, that's why it's important for the buyers to really interview probably a couple, 2, 3 agents and say, okay, who do I think is going to best serve my needs and help me achieve my goals? I think that's the one thing that's going to come out of this. And that was probably an unintended consequence, because buyers, frankly, should have been doing that all along, in my opinion.
That's true. That definitely.
From the seller side, I think the only thing that might happen is if the seller is offering reduced concession situation, the seller might save some money, which means their collected proceeds would go up, but it's a question of how much. I see that the seller, and sellers need to be wise in this area, because if they don't offer concessions that the buying public deems to be acceptable, then they're going to get lower activity or no activity, depending on what's going on in the market. And that could affect the fact that, oh, gee, I'm saving $15,000 because I'm not offering the concession, but I'm getting $50,000 less because I didn't have 6 offers or 3 offers instead of 1. So you got to be very careful all the way around.
Gotcha.
Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does.
Any others?
So any good tips for the home buyers?
The biggest one is get a good quality agent that understands what you're trying to do, and they really need to be working with you as a team. It's a team activity. If you work together as a team, the probability you'll be successful goes up, and the probability that you'll be able to negotiate successfully will go up.
Got you. Hey, Jerry, it's always wise. I learned a lot every time that I talk to you.
Well, thank you. And I need to do a paid political announcement now. So those of you, if you have any questions for Lee on lending, of course, give Lee a call. If you have any questions for me, Jerry Hill, 408-410-3564 is my cell phone. Be happy to answer any questions. I'll be quite honest. It's not confusing, but it's certainly new. And of course, as we work through new, we'll get more experienced with it. But it's pretty straightforward right now, except for the open house situation. So there you go. Have a great day, and Lee, take it away.
Cool. Feel free to give me a call if you have any questions. My numbers is down here.